Our next lesson in economics is called bankruptcy. Our goal is to explain the bankruptcy process. Look at your vocabulary words. The act of being declared legally insolvent is bankruptcy. Legal proceedings that deal with the concerns of those who have declared insolvency is bankruptcy court. One who owes money, goods, or services to another is a debtor. The right to take, sell, or hold property as security or payment of a debt is a lien. Debtor surrenders non-exempt property to creditors but pays debts that haven't been forgiven is liquidation. A debtor must fulfill the monetary obligations from his personal finances is personal liability. A Chapter 13 proceeding that requires the debtor to make planned payments to creditors for up to 5 years is reorganization. Promise to pay to another a certain amount of money which has collateral that the creditor may seize is a secured debt. The section of the United States Code that deals with the rules and procedures of bankruptcy is Title 11. A promise or obligation to pay to another a certain amount of money which has no collateral is an unsecured debt. Bankruptcy is a sad reality for some individuals and businesses. The quick eat fast food business makes a risky leap by adding restaurants in 10 new states and fails. The Wellman Brothers Paint Contracting Partnership cannot meet their financial obligations and they close down. Mr. Arthur Triglia, a retired military man, faces massive debts from his wife's protracted illness and her funeral expenses. These three situations bring about only one answer in the minds of all concerned: bankruptcy. There are special courts throughout our country called bankruptcy courts. Within each state, depending on its size, there may be 3 or 4 courts which specialize in this part of the financial world. Years ago, bankruptcy was considered a public shame and a sign of complete financial failure. Today, though not seen as a devastating humiliation, it is still an embarrassing financial stumble. Yet many individuals and businesses have no choice but to declare bankruptcy. The U.S. Bankruptcy Code was created to give debtors a fresh start. In your notes, go ahead and put today's dates. You're going to need a lot of room today. You may have to go to a new page. We're going to make a web. Bankruptcy. Okay. So bankruptcy is to give individuals a fresh start. The historians of Great Britain and France are filled with terrible stories of debtors, prisons, and penal colonies where people were sent because of their inability to pay their debts. The United States Congress created the Bankruptcy Code to permit debtors the choice to start over again. Although this can be abused, often bankruptcy is the only alternative for some people. Under the United States Code, there are title numbers which cover the laws of court concerning everything from Congress, the flag and seal of the United States, to crimes and criminal procedure. Under Title 11 are the rules and procedures of bankruptcy. Two of the most familiar to many people are 2 chapters under Bankruptcy 7 and 13. Okay, so in Great Britain and France, there are debtors' prisons. So Great Britain, it's A-I. Great Britain and France people that cannot pay are sent to debtors' prisons. How are you going to pay if you're in prison? Or penal colonies? What happens in bankruptcy? A bankruptcy proceeding is where a debtor states his inability to pay consumer or business debts. In bankruptcy, debtors may choose to do one of two things. They may request a dismissal from continuous personal liability for unsecured debts, or they may try to reorganize financially by asking for extra time and wish to repay part or all of their debt. Okay, so a debtor states his inability to pay. So bankruptcy is when a debtor states inability to pay. What are secured and unsecured debts? Jerry owes $300 on his credit card. His credit card debt is an unsecured debt. Samantha owes $500 in medical bills. Medical bills are also unsecured debts. Eric took out a loan from the bank for $3,000 and used his car as collateral. That bank loan is a secured debt. And in bankruptcy, debts are divided into both secured and unsecured debts. An unsecured debt is a promise or obligation to pay to another a certain amount of money without collateral. So there's unsecured debt, and that means there's no collateral. C-O-L-L-A-T. Okay, no collateral. And then there's secured debt. And secured debt is when you have collateral. An unsecured debt is a promise or obligation to pay to another a certain amount of money without collateral. If a person fails to pay the debt, the creditor cannot immediately start seizing the person's personal property in order to satisfy the debt. Most debts are unsecured. In a bankruptcy, the priority debts, the debts that the court feels should be paid first, are paid. From the unsecured debts, then the unsecured debts are added up. If the debtor's estate is large enough, the unsecured debts are paid completely. If the estate is not large enough to meet the obligations, they are paid in accordance to their percentage to the amount of money available. If there is not enough of the estate to pay all the unsecured debts, the portion that cannot be paid is forgiven. For example, if Jerry's unsecured debts are $100,000, but he only has enough assets to pay $20,000 of the secured debt, each unsecured creditor will be paid 20 cents for each dollar. Okay, so first, in bankruptcy, the first thing they're going to do is pay the priority debts. The most important debts they're going to pay. And then they're going to add the unsecured debts. Add the unsecured debts. Okay. And the unsecured debts are paid in percentage of money available. Okay. Now there's Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Chapter 7 bankruptcy is known as a straight liquidation, or straight bankruptcy or liquidation. It is probably the most simple and straightforward of all bankruptcy proceedings. In this proceeding, the debtor surrenders his non-exempt property for division among their creditors. The debtor will usually appear only once in court when he meets his creditors. The debtor will still be obligated to pay any debts that the bankruptcy court determines have not been forgiven by the division among the creditors. Okay, so Chapter 7. Chapter 7. There's Chapter 7 bankruptcy. This is liquidation. Okay, and we said that liquidation, the debtor surrenders non-exempt property to creditors but pays debts that haven't been forgiven. Okay. So he still has some debts may not be forgiven. Okay. Alright, what is a lien? Mr. Gower has found bankruptcy and his main creditor has put a lien on his property. What is a lien? A lien is the right to take, sell, or hold property as security or payment of a debt. The creditor may hold the property until the debt is satisfied. Okay, so there's a lien. For instance, if you're paying off a vehicle, your vehicle is going to have a lien on it. That means if you don't pay it, they have a right to take it. Okay, so it's a right to take, sell, or hold. They're usually going to take it and resell it for their money. Okay, Chapter 13 bankruptcy. Okay, so there's also a Chapter 13. Chapter 13 bankruptcy. A Chapter 13 bankruptcy filing is called a reorganization. A Chapter 13 proceeding requires the debtor to make planned payments to creditors for up to 5 years. If the debtor makes all the payments, the unsecured debts are discharged. After a Chapter 13 bankruptcy becomes final, the debtor is released from the obligation of paying any discharged debts. Unlike Chapter 7 bankruptcy, in a Chapter 13 the debtor reorganizes his debts. It is not a liquidation of the debtor's property like a Chapter 7 filing. In a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, the debtor creates a plan to pay most or all of the debts during a 3 to 5 year period. A Chapter 13 plan is not final and can be modified by the court if the debtor shows a good reason in having trouble paying off the debts, such as the loss of his job. Okay, so this is known as reorganization. Where do I want to put it? Reorganize. see if I can squeeze it in there better. Okay. Reorganize. Okay. So it's a plan to pay for up to 5 years. Plan to pay. So it's a payment plan. Okay? Bankruptcy is a threat to those who like to spend it all now. Of course, there will be people who will be hit with devastating illnesses or financial loss, just as there will be businesses that honestly tried to run things well but could not succeed. For them, bankruptcy is no shame. However, in today's world, there is a desire, even among Christians, to buy now and pay later. Such thinking leads to dangers if it is carried on long enough. The exhortation by Paul in Romans 13:8 is, "Owe no man anything," meaning that continual debt is not pleasing to the Lord. A Christian should not have a lifestyle of debt, but of financial responsibility. Jesus taught financial responsibility to the government. Notwithstanding, lest we should offend them, go thou to the sea and cast a hook and take up the fish that first comes up. And when thou hast opened his mouth, thou shalt find a piece of money. That take and give unto them for me and thee. Matthew 17:27. In other words, he was instructing the disciples to fulfill their obligation of paying taxes that were due. He also taught financial responsibility to the church, for all they did cast in of their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living. Mark 12:44. Jesus also mentioned the same obligation is needed at home. But if any provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. Following a diligent and patient pattern of saving and financial practice will keep us out of unnecessary debt and bankruptcy. Okay, so we talked about bankruptcy. Bankruptcy means fresh start. In other countries such as Great Britain and France, if you can't pay your debts, you're sent to debtor's prison or penal colonies. Bankruptcy of the debtor states his inability to pay. There are two kinds of debts. There are unsecured debts, which means there's no collateral backing them, and there's secured debts, which means you have collateral. Whenever you go to bankruptcy court, the first thing they're going to have you do is pay your priority debts. The court is going to prioritize your debts, and the most important, the court's going to have you pay them. And then what they'll do is they'll add your unsecured debts, and they'll pay in percentage of the money available. So if you owe $2,000 in debts, and you only have $200, that means everybody's going to get 10% of what they owe, what you owe them. There's a lien, which is the right to take and sell. There's different kinds of bankruptcy. There's Chapter 13, which is you reorganize, you show them a plan how you can pay your bills in 5 years. Then there's Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which is total liquidation. Some debts won't be liquidated, so some debts may not be forgiven, so they may have to be repaid. And at the beginning it said there was several vocabulary words involving bankruptcy. Make sure you study them, study your lesson, and answer the questions.